They laughed when they handed me the key. My brother Torsten actually laughed. Standing in that lawyer's office in his $400 coat, holding a brass key with a paper tag that said one word. Cabin. He turned it over in his palm like it was a joke someone had told badly. 40 acres of nothing, he said. No power, no water, road washes out half the year. He smiled at me. Congratulations, Wren. You just inherited a pile of rotten logs. My sister Delphine didn't laugh. She just looked away. They had already taken everything else. The house our grandfather built with his own hands. The workshop behind it. The $121,000 he'd saved across 45 years of fixing screen doors for almost nothing. Split down the middle. Between the two of them, I was 16. He had raised me since I was 5. I had spent 3 years feeding him, bathing him, driving him to the clinic an hour away, closing his eyes at the end. And all I got was a key to a shack on a mountain nobody plowed. But here's what my brother didn't know. Here's what nobody in that whole valley knew. My grandfather had spent 45 years hiding something in that cabin. Something he chose me, and only me, to find. Something that would change everything. And when I finally opened that door, the old dog beside me started to shake. Because he had been there before. My name is Wren Callahan. And to understand why a worthless cabin mattered more than a house and a bank account, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to a small valley town, where a man named Silas Callahan raised a girl, who was not his daughter, and taught her the only things he believed a person could really own. I was 5 when my mother died. An aneurysm. That's what the doctor called it. Quick and without warning on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. My father had left when I was still a baby. A man who left a forwarding address that stopped working. And a name I only ever heard spoken in anger. So there was Grandpa, 68 years old at the time, a widower with a daughter in the ground, and 3 grandchildren on his porch with their suitcases. The 2 older ones didn't stay long. Torsten was 17 and Delphine was 14, old enough to remember a different life, old enough to resent the valley for being small, and the old man for being poor. The day Torsten turned 18, he was gone. Bus to the city. Never looked back. Delphine followed him 4 summers after that. A scholarship somewhere far. Promised to call. Calls that came less and less, until they stopped altogether. But I was little, and I had nowhere else to be. So I grew up in the sawdust of my grandfather's shop, with a tape measure for a toy, and a man of few words for a whole family. The shop sat behind the house on the edge of town. People brought Grandpa their broken things. A dresser with a cracked leg. A screen door off its hinges. A kitchen table that wobbled. He fixed them for almost nothing. And the town loved him for it. In the easy, untested way people love a thing they assume will always be there. He started me on a broom. Worked me up to a chisel. By the time I was 10, I could sharpen a blade, until it shaved the hair off my arm. By 12, I could read the grain of a board with my thumb and tell him where it wanted to break. Slow down, he'd say, every time, his hands settling over mine on the spoke shave. Wood doesn't care how fast you are, kid. It only cares if you paid attention. I remember one winter evening, the stove ticking, the 2 of us gluing up a chair seat for the old couple down the road. I asked him why he bothered, why he spent a whole day on a chair they'd pay him $40 for. Grandpa took his time answering. He always did. A chair holds you up whether you notice it or not, he said. People ought to do the same. I didn't understand the whole of it. I was 12, but I kept the sentence. Folded it away with the other things I couldn't throw out. Like the small wooden bird he'd carved me when I was little. A wren no bigger than my thumb. The feathers cut so fine you could count them. I carried it in my coat pocket for so long the paint wore off, and the wood went smooth and dark where my thumb rubbed it. That was the life. Quiet, plain, and mine, until the phone started ringing after a long silence. Grandpa was 76 when his heart first stumbled. and he was never quite the same after. The shop went quiet. I took the morning shift at the lumber yard out on the county road, ringing up nails and fence posts and bags of feed. Then came home at noon to make him lunch, check that he had taken his pills, do the books, drive him to the clinic an hour away. I learned to lift a grown man who had gotten too thin, and to pretend I didn't hear him apologize for it. I was 13. Torsten called twice that whole first year. Delphine sent a card. Then in the last autumn, Torsten came home. He pulled up in a truck that cost more than the house, wearing a coat that had never seen a day of work. And from the first hour, his warmth made me uneasy. He called the old man Grandpa again, which he had not done since he was a boy. He sat at the kitchen table holding Grandpa's hand, talking about the old days, the fishing trips, the lessons at the bench. Grandpa, who was tired and lonely and dying, drank it in like water. Delphine came a week later, in a suit that didn't fit the kitchen. She stood in the doorway like she was afraid to touch anything. She hugged Grandpa, and she cried, and for a second I almost believed her. Almost. "I've been thinking," Torsten said one night, after I'd cleared the plates. "You shouldn't be carrying all this on your own, Grandpa. The bills, the accounts. Let me help. Put me on the checkbook. That way, if anything happens, I can take care of things. Take it off your shoulders." I stood at the sink with my back to them, and I felt the cold come into my chest. "Wren handles the books," Grandpa said. "Wren is 16, Torsten said gently, like it was a kindness. "She's a kid. She shouldn't have to deal with hospitals and lawyers. Let me be the bad guy. That's what the oldest is for." I did not turn around, because if I turned around, my face would say what my mouth could not, which was, "I have been the one dealing with hospitals and lawyers since I was 13 years old. And where were you? But you don't say that. Not to a dying man about the one good thing he thinks is happening." So I kept washing dishes, and I let it happen. 3 weeks later, Torsten's name was on the accounts. A power of attorney was folded in his coat pocket, and Grandpa believed his grandson had finally come home to him. I never said a word against it. He died in February, in his own bed, with me holding his hand and the dog lying across his feet. His name was Cooper, a shepherd mix Grandpa had taken in as a stray a decade back. Gray all through his muzzle now, slow to rise on cold mornings. But he never left that bed those last weeks. Not to eat, not to go out, just stayed there, head across Grandpa's feet, like he had a job to do. It was a little after 4 in the morning. Grandpa's breath got long, and then it got short, and then it just stopped, like a clock winding down. No last words, no squeeze of the hand, just a small sigh, like relief. I sat with him until the sky went gray. Then I got up and made coffee I didn't drink, because I didn't know what else a person was supposed to do. Cooper never moved. I had to lift him off the bed hours later, when the men from the funeral home came. His legs were stiff from lying still so long. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. "I know, boy, I know." I called Torsten. I called Delphine. And then the machine that takes a man apart began to run. We buried him on a hard, bright morning. And the whole valley came, the little church filled, the lot filled, and people stood out in the cold in their good coats. The diner woman, the hardware family, 100 faces I half knew, more than a few of them crying for a man who had only ever patched their furniture. Torsten kept turning in the pew to count the crowd. I watched him do it, craning his neck, doing the math, trying to make it add up. And afterward in the car, he said it out loud like a problem he could not solve. "For a guy who fixed screen doors, half the county showed up. I don't get it." Delphine said nothing. I did not try to explain, because I didn't understand it myself yet. I only knew my grandfather had reached more people than a quiet old woodworker had any business reaching. And that the reason was a thing none of them could see. There were people at that funeral I had never met in my life. A woman in a heavy wool coat, who cried through the whole service. A man in a wheelchair someone had pushed all the way up the church path. A boy of maybe 10 holding a folded piece of paper in his fist, so tight his knuckles went white. I saw the boy set the paper on Grandpa's coffin before he left. I saw him whisper something to it. I never got close enough to read what it said, and when I asked Torsten later who these people were, he shrugged. How would I know? The brothers stayed at the house. Well, Torsten stayed. Delphine got a hotel room in the next town over. She said it was for work. She said the house made her sad. She came by in the mornings and left before dinner. She wouldn't look at Grandpa's chair, and this time the warmth was gone. Torsten moved through the rooms like an appraiser, opening drawers, lifting the corners of rugs, turning over the bottoms of lamps. We should get ahead of this, he told me in the kitchen the morning after the funeral. Estates are a nightmare if you let them sit. I've already called a guy about the house, and there's a fella coming Thursday to look at the tools out back. I set the coffee pot down. The shop. The tools, Wren. Some of that old iron is worth real money to collectors. No point letting it rust. He said it kindly. He always said the worst things kindly. We split everything 3 ways. Even. That's fair, right? Even. Even. I wanted to tell him that even was not fair. That fair would have counted the 3 years I'd spent driving the old man to the clinic. The nights. The lifting. The part of my own life I had folded up and put away. But I was 16, and grief had hollowed me out. And I did not yet understand that being quiet was the same as agreeing. So I watched it happen. A man I had never met loaded Grandpa's bench planes, and his good chisels and the big cast iron vise into the back of a van. On a Saturday, the lawn filled with strangers, picking through my grandfather's life with stickers in their hands, paying $1 for the mug he drank from every morning. By Sunday night, a sign stood in the front yard, and the house I had grown up in was a price and a phone number. The $121,000 went first. Before any of it, Torsten had access, and Torsten was fast. He told me it was going into an estate account, that everything would be sorted out properly, that I should trust him. By the time the lawyer in town gently explained to me what a power of attorney died with, and what it did not, the accounts were already split and gone. The money was somewhere in the city, in a life I would never see. You could fight it, the lawyer told me. An older man with tired eyes, who had known Grandpa for years. He did not sound like he believed I would. But it would take a lawyer you can't afford, and a year you don't have, and he's your brother. He's my brother, I repeated, like that explained anything. There was a reading, though it was hardly worth the name. Most of what Grandpa owned had been jointly held, or already carried off. But the old man had done one quiet thing before he got sick. Some years back he had written out a separate deed, put it with the lawyer in town, sealed, with instructions. The lawyer slid a single folded paper across his desk, and on top of it, a key, brass, old, warm-looking even in the cold office light, with a paper tag tied to it in Grandpa's blocky hand. One word, cabin. The cabin and the land it sits on, the lawyer said. 40 acres up the old quarry road. He left it to you alone, Wren, separate from the rest. He was very particular about that part. That's when Torsten laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, which was somehow worse. It was the laugh of a man who has just been handed a problem he is relieved to give away. That place, he said, shaking his head. God, he used to disappear up there for days. No power, no well, roads washed out half the year. He looked at Delphine. You remember that dump? Delphine almost said something. I saw it move across her face. Some old memory surfacing, then sinking again. I remember, was all she said. It's a tax liability is what it is, Torsten went on. Honestly, Wren, you'd be doing yourself a favor to let the county take it. But hey, he spread his hands. Generous. If the old man wanted you to have the shack, you have the shack. We're not going to fight you over a shack. That was the word he used. Shack. He said it twice more before we left the office, like he wanted me to understand exactly how little I had been given, and exactly how much they had not. I signed where the lawyer pointed. The deed was mine, 40 acres of mountain nobody wanted, and a key to a door I had stood in front of maybe twice in my life, and never once seen opened. Grandpa had taken me up to the cabin only when I was very small. I remembered the porch, and the smell of the pines, and being told to wait outside with a sandwich while he went in, and did whatever it was he did. He went up there alone, always alone, 2 and 3 days at a stretch, all through my childhood. Gone fishing, he called it, though I could not once remember him bringing home a fish. There was one more thing, and it was the only thing that made me cry that whole terrible week. Cooper, the old dog, gray all through his muzzle, slow. He had stopped eating much after Grandpa died. He lay by the bedroom door where the bed used to be, and waited for a man who was not coming. On our last morning in town, I came into the kitchen and heard Torsten on the phone. Yeah, just the one dog. Old. No, I don't think anybody's going to want it. It's pretty far gone. Can you take it today? We're trying to close the house up. A pause. Yeah. The shelter on Route 9 is fine. Whatever you do with strays. I did not raise my voice. I had found, when it mattered, that I did not have to. He's not going to the shelter, I said. Torsten turned, the phone still at his ear. Wren, come on. You can't take care of a dog. You don't even have a place to live. I have a cabin. The words came out of me before I had decided to say them. And the moment they were in the air, I knew they were true. I had a cabin. It was the one thing in the world that was mine and only mine. Given to me on purpose. By the one person who had ever chosen me on purpose. And I was not going to stand in that kitchen and let my brother give away my grandfather's dog, like he was a sticker on a Saturday lawn. I knelt down. Cooper lifted his gray head and looked at me, and I swear the old dog understood every word. Come on, I said softly. Come on, you and me. I loaded what was left of my life into Grandpa's rusted pickup, because the truck had been in my name for years, and that at least Torsten could not touch. A duffel bag of clothes, a box of kitchen things nobody had bought, the lawyer's envelope, a sleeping bag, 2 jugs of water and a flashlight and a sack of dog food. And in my coat pocket, smooth and dark, the little carved wren. Delphine came out to the truck as I was loading the last of it. She stood there a moment in the cold, working up to something. Wren. She stopped, started again. Torsten. He's under some pressure right now. With work. It's not. She could not finish a single sentence. Are you going to be okay up there? I looked at my sister, this woman I barely knew, who had our mother's same dark eyes, and could not hold them on me for more than a second. I don't know, I said honestly, but it's mine. She nodded, like that settled something, or like she wished it did, and she stepped back, and I drove away with the dog on the seat beside me. And I did not look at the house in the mirror. I was maybe 2 miles out of town when the phone rang. Number I didn't know. I almost didn't answer, but something, some little pull in my chest, made me pick up. Hello. A man's voice. Old. Careful. Is this Wren Callahan? Yes. A pause. Long enough that I thought the line had died. Then, your grandfather asked me to call you. When he was gone, he said to wait a few days, until things had settled. Are you alone right now? I almost drove off the road. Who is this? My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is what I'm about to tell you. Are you on your way to the cabin? My hands, on the wheel, went cold. How do you know about the cabin? Wren, listen to me. Do not let anyone into that cabin until you have read everything inside it. Especially not your brother and sister. Do you understand? I don't. Your grandfather trusted me. He trusted very few people. He trusted you. That's why he left it to you. Please, wait until you understand what you have. Before you show anyone. Anyone. But I'll be in touch. Click. I sat there on the shoulder of the road, with the phone in my hand, and the dog looking at me with his ears up. The engine ticked. Snow started. Just a few flakes, drifting down, landing on the windshield, and melting. I put the phone in my pocket. Slowly, and I kept driving. The pavement ran out 4 miles past the edge of town. After that, it was the old quarry road. Frost heaved and rutted, climbing up through pines that closed over the truck, until the afternoon light came down in pieces. Cooper sat up as we climbed, his nose working at the gap in the window, more awake than he had been in weeks. I watched him, in the mirror, and a strange thought came to me. This dog knows where he's going. Cooper, who had lived at the house behind the shop his whole life, who I had never once taken up this road, was sitting straight up on the seat like a passenger who knew the route. He'd been here before, many times, but Grandpa had not brought him. Not with me in the truck. Not that I had ever seen, which meant Grandpa had brought him alone, up this road, many times, over many years, and come home, and never mentioned it. Cooper turned his head and looked at me, and in his old cloudy eyes there was something I did not know how to read. Something like anticipation, something like coming home. The truck ground up the last grade in low gear. The trees opened, and there it was. It was smaller than I remembered, and grayer. The logs had gone silver with weather. The porch sagged on one side. The single front window was dark with grime, and the stone chimney wore a cap of green moss. A forgotten place, surrendering by inches to the mountain. For a long moment I sat in the cab with the engine ticking as it cooled, and I let myself believe what Torsten wanted me to believe, that my grandfather had left me nothing at all. A shack, a pile of rotten logs, the joke my brother had walked out of the lawyer's office laughing about. I closed my eyes, and I thought about the phone call. The old man's voice, "Do not let anyone into that cabin until you have read everything inside it." And I opened my eyes, and I got out. My boots crunched on the frozen needles. I climbed the porch steps. The old boards groaned and held. Cooper was already on the porch, standing very close to the door, his whole body pointed at it, his ears up. And a low sound had started in his chest. Not a growl, something else. Something that lifted the gray fur along his spine. He stared at that door like he had been waiting his whole life for it to open. I stopped with the key in my hand. Cooper. He didn't look at me. He wouldn't take his eyes off the door. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was no reason for that dog to react like this. This was a cabin he had never been in. An abandoned place my grandfather had told me was empty for years. Except my grandfather had come up here alone. Over and over. For decades. And Cooper had been sitting straight up in the truck like he knew the road. Which meant. I couldn't finish the thought. I fit the brass key into the lock. I turned it, and the lock gave with a heavy, oiled click. That did not sound like neglect at all. The smell reached me before my eyes adjusted. Linseed oil, and wood smoke, and the clean bite of fresh-cut pine. It was the smell of the shop behind the house. The smell of my whole childhood. And it had no business. In a place that was supposed to be dead. I stood in the doorway with the flashlight in my hand, and forgot to turn it on. Gray afternoon light came through the one clean window I had not noticed from outside. The inside of the glass wiped clear, though the outside was filthy, and it fell across a room that stopped me cold. This was not a shack. This was a workshop, and it had been used last week. The far wall held tools, real ones, a working set. Chisels and gouges hung in order, from smallest to largest, their edges catching the light, the wood of their handles dark, with the oil of a hand that had held them 10,000 times. A workbench ran the length of the room, scarred and flat and clean. Above it, a row of hand planes sat like they were waiting for someone to come back from lunch. In the middle of the floor stood a chair. It was beautiful. I knew enough to know that much in the first second. A high fan of slender spindles rose, from a seat carved like a saddle. The legs splayed out at angles that should have looked wrong, and instead looked like the chair had grown that way. The wood glowed even in the dim light. It was finished, complete, and it sat alone in the center of the room, like he had set it there, to be looked at. Beside the bench, clamped in the big vise, was another chair, half-made. The seat was shaped but not yet smooth. 3 spindles stood in their holes, and the rest lay in a neat row on the bench, waiting. A curl of shaving lay on the floor beneath it, pale and fresh. I bent down, slowly, like it might disappear if I moved too fast. I picked it up between my thumb and finger. Soft. It was still soft. It had not had time to dry. And yellow. He had been standing right here, making this, in the weeks before his heart gave out for good. He wasn't fishing. I said it out loud. To the dog. To the room. To nobody. He was never fishing. Cooper did not answer. The old dog had walked straight past the chairs, without a glance, nose down, and crossed to the back corner of the room, where a low door was set into the log wall. He stood in front of it with his ears up, and his whole body pointed at it, like a compass needle, and he would not move. "What's back there?" I asked him. I tried the door. Locked, not latched, locked, with a keyhole, and the brass key from my pocket did not fit it. I knelt and looked at the seam, and I saw that the door was thick, far thicker than a closet needed, banded with iron at the top and bottom. Cooper pushed his gray muzzle against the gap at the floor, and breathed in deep, and let out a long whine that climbed at the end. "Okay," I said, resting a hand on his back. "Okay, later." I lit the wood stove first, because the cabin was bitter cold, and because I needed my hands to have a job while my mind caught up. The stove drew clean and strong the moment the kindling caught. The flue wide open and clear. A man does not keep a chimney drawing like that, on a place he has abandoned. Everything I touched told me the same thing, and the thing it told me was that my grandfather had a whole life I had never been allowed to see. That was when I found the letter. It sat on the seat of the finished chair, the beautiful one in the center of the room, weighted down by a smooth gray river stone, so it would not blow when the door opened. Plain envelope, and on the front, in the blocky hand I would have known anywhere, one word, Wren. I lowered myself to the floor in front of the stove, with my back against the warm iron, and Cooper came and lay against my side, and I opened it. "If you are reading this up here," the letter began. "Then it happened close to how I figured, and I am sorry for the part of it that hurt." I stopped, and pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth, and made myself keep reading. "Your brother and sister came back the minute I was gone, and took the things that have a price on them, the house, the money, the tools out of the front shop. I knew they would. I want you to hear me say that I let them. I could have tied it all up so tight nobody could touch a nickel, but I didn't, and I need you to understand why. Even if it takes you a while, anybody can leave you money, Wren. I wanted to leave you something they couldn't carry off." I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter against my chest, and I looked around the room, at the chairs and the tools and the locked door the dog would not leave, and I understood that I was sitting in the middle of an inheritance. And I did not yet have any idea how big it was. The letter went on. "This place was mine, and now it is yours. Everything in it, the chairs, the wood, the iron, what's behind the door in the corner. When you find the key, which you will, because you always could find anything I hid from you. Learn it slow. Don't sell a single thing until you understand what you are selling. There is more here than you think, and most of it is not the kind a person can spend. I taught you everything you need. You just don't know yet how much you know." It was signed as he signed everything to me, not Grandpa or Silas or even Grandfather, but a small drawing, a bird, for quick lines, that anyone else would have missed, and that I would have known in the dark. A wren. Outside, the wind had started to rise, the first edge of weather, coming over the mountain. I sat on the workshop floor with the letter in my lap, and the dog against my side, and a fire in the stove, and I looked at the locked door in the corner. The one Cooper would not leave. The one that held whatever came next. My grandfather had left me a key, to a cabin, to a workshop, to a locked room inside that workshop, to a life he had lived, in secret, for 45 years. While the whole valley thought he was fixing screen doors, while my brother laughed at his pile of rotten logs, while I sat at his bedside for 3 years, and thought I knew him better than anyone alive. I did not know him at all. I was only just beginning to. Cooper lifted his head from my leg, and looked at the locked door, and then he looked at me, and in that old gray face I saw the same question I was asking myself. What's behind it? I did not know. Not yet. But I was going to find out. The stove ticked. The wind rose, and somewhere down the mountain, in a truck I had not heard coming, headlights had already begun to climb the quarry road. The headlights turned into the driveway a little after 7. I saw them sweep across the front window. Yellow, slow, climbing. Cooper lifted his head off my leg. His ears came forward. I stood up, because I was not expecting anyone. Because nobody knew I was here, because the only road up this mountain was the one I had just driven. And it was dark, and it was steep, and the snow had started sticking. I moved to the window. A pickup, old, dented, blue in the porch light, not Torsten's kind of truck. A woman got out, heavy coat, hair pulled back, a basket in one hand. I let out a breath I had not known I was holding. Ottilie Brannock. She ran the diner in town. She had run it my whole life. She had slipped me extra bacon on Saturday mornings, when I was small. She had hugged me at the funeral like I was her own. I opened the door before she could knock. You shouldn't have driven up here, I said. Road's icing.
Ive driven vers.
She stepped inside, stamped snow off her boots, handed me the basket without ceremony. Bread, a jar of soup, a wedge of cheese, a tin of something that smelled like cinnamon. You didn't come down today, she said. I figured you might not know how to ask. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't. She looked around the cabin. Her eyes moved, slow, careful, across the workbench, the tools, the half-made chair in the vise, the finished chair standing in the middle of the room like a promise. And she went very still. She did not gasp. She did not say, "Oh my God." She did not do any of the things a person does when they are surprised. She just went still, which was worse, because it meant she was not surprised at all. She turned to me, slowly. Wren. What? How long have you been up here? Since yesterday. And you found all this? Yes. She looked at the finished chair, and her eyes filled up, but she did not let the tears fall. She was too old and too tired for that kind of showing. He said you would, she said. He said if anything ever happened, you'd be the one who understood. I could not breathe. You knew about this?
No.
Ottilie. I didn't. I swear to you, honey, I didn't. She sat down, heavily, on the edge of a wooden crate. She looked at her hands. But I suspected. She would not tell me right away. She said the roads were bad, and she needed to be back, before full dark. She said she'd come again in a few days. She said I should eat the soup while it was hot. But at the door, with her hand on the frame, she stopped. Your grandfather, she said. He was the best man in this valley. I know. You don't. Not yet, but you will. She looked past me, at the locked door in the corner. Whatever's behind that door, honey, he wanted you to find it. Not me, not your brother. You. How do you know there's a door? She smiled, a small tired smile. Because I know him, and he never did anything without a good reason. And a locked door in a place like this is a reason. She squeezed my arm. Be careful driving down. When you do, don't come at night. And she was gone. I stood in the doorway, watching her taillights climb back down the mountain. Slow, careful, winking out around the bend. Cooper leaned against my leg. I looked down at him. What did he do up here, boy? Cooper did not answer, but his ears were pointed straight at the locked door. Again, I did not sleep that night. I lay in the sleeping bag by the stove, and I listened to the wind, and the settling of old logs, and Cooper's slow breathing beside me, and I thought about the phone call from the strange man. Do not let anyone into that cabin. I thought about Ottilie. He said you would be the one who understood. I thought about the fresh shaving on the floor, still soft. I thought about a locked door with iron bands and a dog who would not leave it. And I thought about my grandfather, the man I had believed I knew, the man who fixed screen doors for $40, the man who drove a rusted pickup and let his own accounts get taken by a grandson who had called him twice a year. Because if the accounts were the whole story, then he was just a poor old man who got robbed at the end. But if he had something else, something up here, something worth a locked door and a warning phone call and a diner woman going still, then he was not poor at all. He had chosen to look poor, which was a completely different thing. I got up before dawn. I threw a log on the stove, and I started looking for the key. I looked everywhere. I looked in every drawer. I looked behind every tool. I looked under the workbench and inside the wood stove and up the chimney flue as far as my arm would reach. I looked in the finished chair, underneath the seat, inside the joins. I looked in the sleeping bag, in the coffee tin, in my own coat pockets. I looked for 2 hours, and I found nothing. Cooper watched me the whole time, from his spot in front of the locked door, not moving, just watching, like he was waiting to see if I was going to figure it out. I sat down on the floor, frustrated, rubbed my eyes, and I heard my grandfather's voice, not a memory of it, but actually heard it, clear as anything. Every workbench I ever built has a secret drawer, kid. I froze. 2 knots that look like nothing, pressed together. I got up. I went to the bench, and I ran my hand along the underside of the front edge. My fingers found the first knot almost immediately. It was warm, rubbed smooth, from a thumb that had pressed it thousands of times. Then the second, 6 inches to the right. I pressed them together. Something inside the bench clicked, and a drawer the length of my forearm slid out, without a sound. Inside, one thing, an iron key, long old, heavy in my hand. Cooper stood up. His whole body was quivering. I looked at the locked door. I looked at the key. I looked at the dog. Okay, boy, I whispered. Let's find out. The key slid into the lock like it belonged there. Turned on the first try. Cooper was through the gap, before the door finished swinging. I followed him in, with the oil lamp held high, and the small room on the other side opened up. In the yellow light, I stopped. I actually stopped moving, because what I was looking at was not possible. Chairs, a dozen of them, at least, maybe more, wrapped in gray moving blankets, and standing in 2 careful rows, like soldiers waiting for review. I stepped forward. Slowly, I lifted the corner of the nearest blanket, a settee, the wood the color of dark honey. The arms curved like something poured, rather than carved. Every line of it, perfect. I let the blanket fall back. I lifted another, a rocker, so fine it seemed to hold its breath. Another, an armchair, tall-backed, elegant, the kind of piece that belongs in a museum, not in a shack. On a mountain, nobody plows. Along one wall of the small room ran a shelf. A dozen fat books, cracked spines, ledgers. Beside them, boxes of letters, going back decades. On the end of the shelf, by itself, sat a single thick envelope, with my name on it, the second letter. I picked it up. My hands were shaking now, but I did not open it yet, because I needed to look at the ledgers first. Because if these chairs meant what I thought they meant, then the ledgers were going to tell me the rest of the story, and I needed to be ready. I pulled down the newest one. I sat on the rolled edge of a wrapped chair, and I opened it. I had kept my grandfather's books for years, and I could read his hand and his columns in my sleep, and what I saw made me sit down harder. It was a record of 45 years of work. A chair here, a settee there, 2 or 3 pieces a year, never more, each one with a date, and a city, and a number beside it. The numbers were not small. For $1,000. 6, 9 for a pair, 11 for a settee that went to a museum in the spring of a year when I was still in grade school. Page after page, decade after decade, quiet money, earned by a man who drove a rusted pickup and let the diner owner believe he could not pay for his own breakfast. He had not been poor. My grandfather had never once been poor. He had simply decided not to look rich. But the numbers were not the thing that broke me. The numbers were only the first column. Because across from the money coming in the same careful hand, ran a second column, and the second column was going out. Every line of it, a gift. I stared at the page. I turned to another, then another, page after page, marked only with initials, and a purpose, and a note. R.M. Roof paid.
Ngradzi. De ela. Hospital bills.
Full amount. Through lawyer, volunteer fire department, pumper truck. The Okafor family 2 years tuition. A mortgage, 3 winters running. For a family whose initials I knew belonged to the people who ran the hardware store. A young couple, furnace replaced. January their first baby came home. A funeral, paid quietly, for a logger nobody else would bury. A widow's property taxes. A girl's first semester at community college. A back room of groceries, run on a tab, forgiven every Christmas, and never once mentioned. I turned pages faster, and the whole valley rose up out of them. Every family I had ever known. Every quiet miracle the town had ever muttered about. Him. All of it. Him. And then I saw it. Autumn. 11 years back. One line. O.B. Husband, hospital. All of it. Through lawyer. She is never to know.
O.B. Chili Branok.
Her husband had died 11 years ago. The whole town had said the hospital should have taken her house. That the bills were more than she'd make in a lifetime. And then, somehow, they just went away. Everyone paid.
Ngradzi.
Through a lawyer. And Ottilie had spent 11 years suspecting one man. And never being able to prove it. Because the one man she would have asked would just have looked at her like she'd lost her mind. She said you would be the one who understood. I understood now. I understood everything now. I sat there in the little room, with the ledger open in my lap. Chairs all around me in their gray blankets. The dog leaning against my leg. And I cried. Not loud. Not messy. Just quiet. The kind of crying you do when the thing you are learning is too big to make a sound about. Because my grandfather had not been a poor old woodworker. My grandfather had been the whole valley, the reason that town still had a fire truck, and a diner, and a hardware store, and a girl off at college who would never know who paid. And not one person he saved had ever known his name, because he had never signed a single one of those gifts. He had never once let anyone thank him. I stayed in that room until the oil lamp burned low. I did not read every page. I could not. It would have taken days. There were 45 years of pages. But I read enough. I closed the ledger, very carefully, like it was a Bible. I put it back on the shelf. And I picked up the finished chair from the main room, the beautiful one, the one that had held his letter. I tipped it gently onto its side, because my grandfather had taught me that the bottom is where a maker tells the truth, and burned into the underside of the seat. Small and clean and deliberate was a mark, a bird. For lines, a wren. I stared at it. I reached into my coat pocket, and I took out the little wooden bird, the one he had carved me when I was 5, smooth and dark, from 20 years of my thumb. I held them next to each other, the carved bird, the burned mark, identical. He had not signed his life's work with his own name, He had signed it. With mine. I found the branding iron a minute later, hanging on the tool wall, where I had walked past it twice. A slim steel rod, with the bird shaped in the business end. The tip blackened. From 100 fires. I sat down on the workshop floor, with the chair in my lap, and the cold iron in one hand, and the carved bird, from my pocket held up in the other. 3 things. They matched, and I understood. The first piece of it. He had made every one of these chairs. Every settee. Every rocker. Every piece that had gone out to museums, and collectors and rich people in cities I would never see. And he had signed them. All of them. With me. Not with Silas Callahan. Not with any other name. With Wren. For 45 years. Before I was even born. He had been signing chairs with my name. Waiting for a granddaughter he did not yet have. To become the person the mark was for. I do not know how long I sat there. The stove ticked. The wind moved outside. Cooper laid his heavy head across my knee. Eventually, when my legs were numb, I got up, and I made myself do something ordinary. I fed Cooper. I ate a piece of Ottilie's bread. I put more wood on the stove, because if I did not do something ordinary, I was going to fall apart, and I could not afford to fall apart. Not yet. I still had the second letter to read. I still had a locked room full of chairs I did not know how to sell. I still had a life I did not know how to live. But I had a family now. In a way I had not had one before. A dead grandfather, a silent town, and a whole valley of people who had been saved by a man they never knew. I looked around the little cabin. I whispered it out loud. I don't know what to do with this. Cooper looked at me. His old cloudy eyes said what I already knew. You will. I drove down to town the next morning. I had to. I was almost out of water, and the second letter was too big to read alone. I needed the sound of other people. I needed the smell of coffee. I needed the diner. I needed Ottilie, but I did not tell her. I sat in the corner booth, and she brought me eggs, and she brought Cooper a bowl of bones, and she sat across from me, and she did not ask a single question. I loved her for it. She just poured coffee, and she said, quiet, like she was talking to herself. Your grandfather, when your grandmother was sick, years and years ago, he came in here every morning. Same order, same booth. He'd hardly say a word. He'd just eat, and leave a tip that was too big, and go. She turned her mug a slow half-circle on the table. One morning, after she died, he came in. Same booth. Same order. He said to me, Ottilie, you keep a light on in here even when it's not lit. That's a thing. She smiled at the memory. I never forgot that. Then she looked at me, very steady. When my husband died, honey, and those hospital bills disappeared, I asked everyone I knew. I called every charity in the county. I begged that lawyer for a name. And you know what he said? He said, the friend asked to remain anonymous, and the friend is a person who I respect enough to honor that. Her eyes were wet. I always thought. She stopped. She could not say it. She wanted me to say it, but I could not either. Not yet. I reached across the booth and put my hand over hers. I said, eat your breakfast, Ottilie. It's getting cold. Her hand under mine started to shake, and she nodded. She nodded, and she did not ask another question. I paid. She would not let me, so I hid the money under the plate, and she chased me halfway to the truck. Wren. Ottilie. You can't. I can. That is not how this works. It is now. I climbed into the truck, and I closed the door. She stood on the sidewalk in her apron, looking at me, like she was trying to memorize my face. I rolled down the window. Ottilie, whatever you thought about what happened all those years ago. She waited. I said, you were right to think it. Her eyes filled up. And I drove. I was halfway up the quarry road when my phone rang. I almost did not answer, but I saw the name, Torsten. I picked up. Hey Wren, it's me, just checking in, making sure you're all right up there. His voice was warm, the kind of warm that had made me uneasy across my grandfather's kitchen table. I'm fine. Yeah? How's the cabin? It's a cabin. Cold. It's February. He laughed, like I had made a joke. Listen, quick thing. When you're poking around that cabin, keep an eye out for any of Grandpa's papers. Would you? Business stuff, old records, anything official looking. There's some estate things I've got to button up, and I think he might have kept some files up there. Just bag anything like that, and call me. I did not answer. Don't throw anything out. Okay. I did not answer. Wren? Yeah. Love you. Call me. He hung up. I sat there, in the middle of the quarry road, with the truck idling, and Cooper looking at me, and I felt the cold come into my chest, because 2 weeks ago, Torsten had called this cabin a dump, a shack, a tax liability. He had laughed at it across a lawyer's desk, and he could not get away from it fast enough. Now, 2 weeks later, he wanted the papers inside it. He wanted me to bag them, and call him, and not throw anything out. I put the phone in my pocket. Slowly, something was very wrong. I drove the rest of the way up, faster than I should have. Cooper braced himself on the dashboard. I pulled up to the cabin, and I sat there, engine running, staring at the front door, and I thought about it. I thought about all of it. The phone call from the stranger. Do not let anyone in. The way Ottilie had gone still. The way Delphine had looked at me, and not been able to finish a single sentence. The way Torsten had laughed. And then, 2 weeks later, called back, wanting papers. I thought about the ledgers. 45 years of gifts. 45 years of secrets. I thought about a grandson who had put his name on his grandfather's bank accounts. So fast. And been so smooth about it. And I thought, he knows. He knows something is here. He does not know what, but he knows something, and he is coming for it. I got out. I let Cooper out. I went inside, and I closed the door behind me, and I dropped the bar, and I went to the little back room, and I picked up the second letter. I sat in the finished chair, the one Grandpa had left for me, with the mark burned into the underside that was my own name, and I opened it. You know about the chairs by now. The letter began. And you know about the other column, the one that matters more. I never wanted thanks for it. Thanks turns a gift into a debt, and I was done collecting debts. But you should know how a man ends up living like this, because it didn't start out as kindness. It started as a mistake. I read. I did not stop. He wrote about my mother, about how when he was younger than I was now, a furniture company had offered to buy his chair. Not one chair. The design. They were going to make 10,000 of them a year in a factory. And they were going to make him richer than anybody in the county. He wrote that he spent 2 years chasing it like a dog chasing a truck. That my mother was a teenager in those 2 years. And he was not a father in those 2 years. He was a man on the phone. That when she fell in love with a boy he did not like. He told her she was throwing her life away. And he said it in the hard voice the money had put in his mouth. And she left. She left. Because he had already left first. He just did it standing in his own kitchen. By the time he came to his senses and tore up that contract, she was gone. And the years he could have had with her were gone with her. She came back to him once. With me. A baby. And no ring. And no husband. And no anger left in her. Only tired. And then she died. And he had me, and he made himself a promise, standing in that hospital hallway, with me asleep on his shoulder. He would make chairs with his own 2 hands, until those hands quit. He would never again let money cost him a person, and whatever the work earned, he would give it away, quiet, so the wanting of it could never get back inside him, and make him hard. I put your name on every chair, Wren. Not as a trade name, as an apology to your mother, and a promise to you. The thing that almost wrecked this family was going to carry your name out into the world. to people who would keep it for 100 years. That is the only kind of forever I had to give you. The money was never the inheritance. It was just the part your brother and sister could see. I read the last line, and I set the letter on my knees, and I let the cabin be quiet around me. Outside, the wind had risen again, the first real edge of a storm coming over the ridge. Cooper lifted his head and looked toward the dark window, and I did not feel like a girl who had been robbed anymore. I felt like a girl who had been handed a thing so large. She would spend the rest of her life learning to carry it. 3 days went by. I did not go down the mountain. I made the food last. I melted snow for Cooper's water. I sat in the workshop and I read ledgers. Slowly, in order, from the oldest to the newest. I learned things I did not want to know. I learned that my grandfather had paid for the property taxes on a small cemetery plot in the next county for 20 years. My mother's plot, beside a spot he had reserved for himself. He had been buried in it 2 weeks ago, and I had not even known he owned the ground. I learned that he had paid, quietly, for a music scholarship for a girl I had gone to school with, a girl whose family had lost their father to a mill accident, a girl who now played piano at a college 2 states away. She would never know. He had signed the check, "Anonymous friend of your father." I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that page. On the 3rd night, I heard the truck. Late, after dark, headlights climbing the road slow. Cooper stood up before I did. His whole body went tense. I moved to the window. A car. Not a truck. A dark sedan. City tires. Skidding on the icy grade. Not Torsten's. Not Ottilie's. I did not know this car. It came to a stop in the little clearing. The headlights swept the porch, and then went dark. The driver's door opened. A man got out. Tall. Older. Silver hair going white at the temples. A heavy wool coat that had cost more than my truck. Leather gloves. He stood by the car, and he looked at the cabin. He did not come to the porch. He waited. I understood then, somehow, that he was waiting for me to decide. I put my hand on Cooper's back. I opened the door. I stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me. The man stood very still in the beam of my flashlight. "Wren Callahan," he said. And I recognized the voice from the phone, the voice that had told me, "Do not let anyone in." He raised both hands slightly, palms open. "I know it's late, and I know I'm a stranger. My name is Elias Thorne. Your grandfather made me promise to come, if certain things happened, and they have." He paused. "May I come inside? I have something I need to tell you, and you are not going to have very much time." Behind him, down the mountain, far below, another set of headlights had just turned onto the quarry road and begun to climb. I let him in. I do not know why. Maybe because he had told me not to let anyone else in, and that meant he was allowed. Maybe because Cooper did not growl at him. Cooper always knew before I did. Maybe because the other headlights were climbing, and I did not have time to be careful. Elias Thorne took off his gloves at the door. He looked around the workshop the way a man walks into a church, not touching anything, just seeing. His eyes moved. The tools, the bench, the half-made chair in the vise. The finished one in the center of the room. He stopped at the finished one. He stood there, for a long moment, and I watched something happen to his face. A kind of grief, but also a kind of joy, like a man who had just been told an old friend had left him a message from beyond. "So he finished it," he said, quietly, to himself. "He finished it before the end. You knew him. I knew what he made. I never met him." "You never met him?" "Not once, in 30 years. I stared at him. "Then how do you know he made this?" He almost smiled. "Because I have sold 41 of them. Since 1994. I sat down. I did not mean to. My legs just gave up under me, and I sat in the chair beside the stove. And Cooper came and put his head in my lap. Elias sat down too, on the wooden crate where Ottilie had sat. very carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. 41, I said. 41 chairs, 6 settees, 11 rockers, a few odd pieces. He worked slowly. To museums. To museums. To private collections. To some of the most respected collectors in this country. He looked at me. To a very old man in a very warm study 800 miles from here, who is currently 92 years old, who ordered a writing armchair 19 years ago and has been waiting. I could not speak. I gave up on him getting it, Elias said. About 6 months ago, when your grandfather stopped answering my letters. He was sick then. I know that now. He looked at the finished chair. But he made it anyway. He made it for a dying man he had never met, in the last weeks of his own life, when his own hands were failing. Because he had promised. I do not know how long we sat there, Cooper's breathing, the tick of the stove, the wind starting to rise outside. Finally I said, "There are more." "More what?" "More chairs. In the back." Elias went very still. "How many?" "I don't know. A dozen. Maybe more." "May I?" I nodded. I got up, and I opened the door to the little back room. And I held the lamp up. He stepped inside. He made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. A soft exhalation, like the wind had been knocked out of him. He lifted one blanket, then another, then another. He did not touch the chairs themselves. He would not. At the last blanket, he knelt down, slowly, his old knees popping. He looked at that chair for a long time. Then he turned to me. "Wren." "Yes. Do you understand what you have?" "I'm starting to."
No.
"You are not." He stood up, slowly. "There is more in this room than most museums in this country contain of any single American maker. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Your grandfather is going to be one of the most important American furniture makers of the 20th century. He said it flat, like he was reading a weather report. He does not know that, because he is dead, and he never wanted anyone to know his name. He looked around at the wrapped chairs. But it is going to happen anyway, because these chairs will outlast us all. I sat on the workshop floor after he came back out of the little room. I did not stand up, because if I stood up, I was going to be sick, or I was going to laugh, or I was going to fall apart. And I could not afford to do any of those things, because outside, the other headlights were still climbing. Elias saw my face, and he understood. He sat down again, on the crate. "Who is coming?" he said. Quietly. "My brother, probably." "Does he know about this?"
No.
"Does he know something is here?" "He suspects." Elias nodded, slowly. "That is what I came to tell you about." He reached into his coat, into the inside pocket, and he pulled out an envelope, and laid it on the workbench between us. "Your grandfather sent me this, 9 months ago, before he got too sick to write. He said if anything ever happened, and if I ever heard from a girl named Wren, I was to bring her this, in person, and explain." I looked at the envelope. I did not want to open it. "What is it?" "It is a copy of a loan guarantee for $800,000. "A what?" "Signed by your grandfather, pledging these 40 acres as collateral, a year and a half ago." My mouth went dry. "He didn't."
No.
"He didn't sign that."
No.
His hand was shaking. He couldn't have." "I know, Wren. I know." Elias's voice was gentle. "That is the point. It is a forgery. Your brother did it to keep his development from collapsing. He used your grandfather's name to borrow $800,000 against land your grandfather owned, land that is now yours." He looked at me. "And the bank has been calling for 6 months, wanting their money." I stood up. I sat down. I stood up again. Cooper watched me with his ears back. But if it's a forgery, then the bank cannot touch the land, right?" But your brother would go to prison for fraud, right? Which he does not want. Which is why he wants that piece of paper. Very badly. Which is why he called me, asking for papers. Elias nodded. Your grandfather found this document 9 months ago. Came in the mail, because your brother had listed him as guarantor, and the bank was following up. Your grandfather opened it, and saw his own name, forged. He paused, and he did nothing. Nothing. He could have called the police that same afternoon. He could have ended your brother's life in a single phone call. Why didn't he? Elias reached into the envelope and pulled out one more piece of paper, a small folded note, in my grandfather's blocky hand. He handed it to me. He left this for you. I unfolded it. Cooper leaned against my leg. Wren. I found this in my mail the spring before I died. The bank sent it because my name was on it as guarantor, and I had never seen it before in my life. Your brother signed me to save his business. I could have called the bank and the sheriff and ended him in an afternoon. I didn't. And I want you to know it was not to protect him. It was to protect you, and what you would have to turn into, to use a thing like this. I am leaving it with you, because you have a right to know what your brother is. And because one day, he is going to stand in front of you, and ask you for the last thing I left you. When he does, you will have this in your hand. And you will get to choose what kind of person you are. That is the only inheritance that ever mattered. Don't let it make you hard. At the bottom of the note, the bird. For lines, the wren. I could not breathe. I sat down on the floor, hard. Cooper crawled halfway into my lap, like he used to when I was a child crying about my mother. I held the note. I read it. I read it again. And then I understood. I understood everything. Because my grandfather had known. He had known this was coming. He had known my brother would forge his name. He had known the loan would collapse. He had known Torsten would come up this mountain, on a night not so different from this one, and demand the last thing his grandfather had left. He had known. He had known, and he had left me the weapon, not to use it, but to see if I would. Elias watched me, not saying anything. I looked up at him. You brought this now, tonight. Yes, because he is coming. Yes. How do you know he's coming? Because your sister called me. This morning. She got my name from the estate papers. She has been trying to reach me for 2 weeks. Delphine. Yes. Delphine called you. She told me your brother was in trouble. She told me he was going to come to the mountain. She told me she was afraid he would do something stupid, or worse. She said, and I quote, "Please make sure my sister does not have to face him alone." I stared at him. Delphine said that. She did. Where is she now? Elias hesitated. She is behind me, on the road, in her own car. She wanted to be the first here, but she made a wrong turn at the county line. She should be maybe 20 minutes behind me. He paused. Your brother is maybe 10 minutes behind her. The wind hit the cabin broadside. The oil lamp swayed. Shadows jumped across the log walls. I stood up. Elias stood up. Wren, listen to me. I looked at him. I am 80 years old. I have known a lot of people in this business. Most of them are wolves. Your grandfather was not. He gave me 30 years of the finest work I have ever handled. And he asked, in return, only that I keep his name a secret, and that I be here, on this night, to make sure his granddaughter did not stand alone. He earned that. He picked up his gloves. I am going to stay in the truck. I will be right outside. If you need me, you turn the porch light on and off twice. And I will come in. But this is your house now. Not mine. And what happens tonight is yours. He put on his coat. He paused at the door. He was not a poor old woodworker, Wren. He was a great man. And he chose you. Then he stepped out into the snow. I stood in the middle of the workshop. Cooper beside me. the note in one hand, the forged loan in the other. The wind rose again, down the mountain. In the distance, I could hear the whine of a small engine, fighting the icy grade. I looked at the finished chair, the one with my name burned into the bottom. I looked at the tools on the wall. I looked at the door. I thought about my brother. I thought about how he had held my grandfather's hand across the kitchen table and called him Grandpa for the first time since he was a boy. I thought about how he had gotten Grandpa to sign the power of attorney. 2 in the morning, when Grandpa had just taken his sleeping pills. I thought about how he had cleared out the accounts before the ink was dry on the death certificate. I thought about him laughing in the lawyer's office, calling this place a shack. I thought about the phone call yesterday. Love you. Call me. I thought about the forged signature. Silas Callahan. Written in a young man's confident hand. When my grandfather's hand had shaken so badly, he could not lift his own coffee cup. And I thought, Torsten had forged our grandfather's name. While that same grandfather was still alive, still lucid some days, still trying to hold on. He had not even waited for him to die. He had stolen from him. While he was still breathing, I felt something rise up in me, something hot and clean and terrible, not just anger, judgment, because I had the weapon in my hand. Right now, I could send this loan document and this note to one email address, tonight, before my brother even got up the mountain, to one prosecutor, or one journalist, or the sheriff, or all three. By tomorrow morning, Torsten would be finished. His wife would leave him. His children would grow up ashamed. His business would burn. His name would be a warning. He would deserve every second of it. He had done it to himself. He had forged our dying grandfather's name to steal $800,000. Not for his family, for a real estate deal, to be richer than he already was. He had used the hands of a man who was too weak to lift his own coffee cup, to rob him, while he was still trying to live. I could end him, right now, tonight. I thought about doing it. I thought about it for a long time. Cooper watched me, his eyes calm, and then, very quietly, I heard my grandfather's voice, not a memory of it, but actually heard it, the way I had heard it about the secret drawer, clear as a bell in a cold morning. Don't let it make you hard. I stood in the middle of the workshop, and I put the note down. And I put the loan document down. Beside it, I folded them together. I slid them into the inside pocket of my flannel shirt, over my heart. I would not send it. Not tonight. Because if I sent it, right now, in this moment, full of the heat I was full of, it would be revenge. And my grandfather had not left me a weapon for revenge. He had left me a weapon for a choice. And a choice is not a choice. If you make it while you are angry, I needed to see him first. I needed to see my brother's face. I needed to hear what he would say, not because it would matter to the truth. The truth was already in my pocket, but because it would matter to me, to who I would be on the other side of tonight. My grandfather had spent 45 years learning not to be hard. I could give him 1 hour before I decided. I heard the second car pull up. Small, foreign, wrong for the road. The engine died. The door opened. Boots on frozen needles. A quick step. Not a heavy one. Not Torsten. Delphine. I knew before I opened the door. She came up the porch steps. Not knocking. Just standing there. In a wool coat too thin for a mountain. Her hair coming loose from its clip. Her eyes on me. I opened the door. She looked at me. She did not say hello. She said,
I'm sorry.
I looked at my sister, this woman I barely knew, who had our mother's dark eyes, and could not hold them on me for more than a second at a time. For 22 years, I stepped back. Come in. She came in. She stopped just inside the door. Same as Elias had. Same as I had. Her eyes moved. The tools. The bench. The half-made chair. The finished one. And she started crying. Not loud. Just standing there. with snow melting on her shoulders, and tears running down her face. Cooper walked over to her, and sat at her feet. She looked down at him. She sank to her knees, and she buried her face in the ruff of the old dog's neck. She said something, muffled. I could not hear it, but she said it again. I was here. I said, what? She looked up at me, her face wet. I was here, once, when I was 12. Delphine. I followed him. He drove up. I hid in the truck bed under a tarp. He didn't know. And I watched him, through that window, for 4 hours. He was making a rocker. He was singing, under his breath. I never heard him sing, not once, at home, ever. He was a different person up here, and I never told anyone, not Torsten, not anyone, because I thought, if I told, he would stop letting me follow. He never invited me up here again. I never had the courage to come back on my own. She pressed her forehead against Cooper's shoulder. He invited you, Wren. He invited you, and he never invited me. But I don't blame him. I don't. He knew. He knew I was already like Torsten. He knew. I did not know what to say. I did not know what to do with any of it. My sister, on her knees, in my grandfather's cabin, crying into the fur of my grandfather's dog, confessing a secret she had carried for 13 years. I sat down on the floor beside her, and after a while, I put my hand on her back, because that was what our mother would have done, if our mother had lived. Delphine let out a shaky breath. I didn't come here to take anything from you. I know. You don't know, because you have every reason to think I did. Delphine, I have to tell you something, and you have to listen. Fast. Because he's coming. She sat back on her heels. Torsten is coming up this mountain right now. He is going to try to make you sell this cabin, or sign it over, or something. I don't know exactly, but he needs it. He needs it badly. Because he did something. Very bad. I said. The forged loan. Delphine's mouth opened. She stared at me. You know. I know. How? I have it. In my pocket. Right now. Grandpa found it before he died. He kept a copy. He left it for me. With a note. She started crying again. But different now. Not grief. Relief. Oh, thank God. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you. For 2 weeks. I did not know if you knew. I did not know if Grandpa knew. I did not know if there was any proof. There is proof. Yes. Then you can. You can stop him. I can. She looked at me. Wet-eyed. Waiting. I did not answer. She read my face. Wren. Are you thinking about not stopping him? I did not answer. She sat back on the floor, her hands in her lap. For a long moment, she did not say anything. Then, quietly, Grandpa would have said the same thing. I know. He would have said, don't do it just because you're angry. I know. But you are allowed to be angry, Wren. You are allowed. She looked at the door. He forged our grandfather's name while he was still alive. I said it, out loud, for the first time. He forged our grandfather's name while he was still alive. Yes. He didn't even wait. No. He didn't even wait. I was crying too now. I had not known I was crying, but there were tears on my face. Delphine reached out, and she took my hand. So what are you going to do? I looked at her. I looked at the door. And then, very far away, Cooper's ears came up. We heard it too. The sound of a heavy truck. Climbing. I got up. I wiped my face. I did not want him to see me crying. I did not want him to see anything he could use. I looked at Delphine. Stand up. She stood up. Stand behind me. Do not say anything. Not until I ask you to. If he tries to talk to you, look at me, not him. Okay. Cooper. Come. Cooper came to my side. I looked around the workshop, the finished chair, the tools, the locked back room with the ledgers of 45 years of quiet giving. the letters, the proof. The truth was all in this room. And in 1 hour, my brother was going to walk through that door, and he was going to lie to me about all of it, and I was going to have to decide whether the truth was enough. The wind hit the cabin again, harder now, real weather. Snow started coming down sideways. I stood in the middle of my grandfather's workshop, in my grandfather's flannel shirt, with my grandfather's dog beside me, and my sister at my shoulder. We were sisters. We had always been sisters. We had just never been. Yet, the headlights swung into the clearing and stopped. The engine shut off, and a door opened. I heard boots, heavy ones, crossing the snow, coming up the porch steps, and Cooper, very softly, began to growl. For the first time since we had come up this mountain, the old dog was not looking at the locked door. He was looking at the front door, where the sound of a man in city shoes was climbing toward us. The knock came 3 times, firm, not asking. Cooper's growl deepened. I put my hand on his head. Easy, boy. I looked at Delphine. She nodded once and stepped behind me. I opened the door. Torsten stood on the porch, his shoulders up around his ears, snow on his coat, the good one, the $400 one, city shoes, city gloves, city eyes. He saw Delphine before he saw me. His face changed. You. Hello, Torsten. What the hell are you doing here? Same as you. He looked at me. The switch flipped. The warmth came on. The salesman came home. Wren, God, look at you. You're freezing. Living up here in this. He stepped inside without asking, stamped his boots, rubbed his hands together, looked around like a man arriving at a hotel he had reserved. His eyes stopped on the finished chair. Just for a second, his face opened. A boy remembering a workshop like this one. Then it closed again, and he was rubbing his hands and looking for the angle. Okay, so this is actually kind of perfect. He walked past me, uninvited, toward Grandpa's chair by the stove. He sat down in it, without asking. He did not know it was Grandpa's chair. He never had. Wren, listen, I've been doing a lot of thinking about your situation. And I feel terrible. I do. About how the estate shook out. You got the short end. So here's what I want to do. I've got a contact, a guy who buys mountain parcels for hunting leases. He'll take the 40 acres off your hands. Cash. I talked him up to 30,000. Which for this Wren, that's a gift. That's way over what the county thinks it's worth. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, all sincerity. You'd walk away with real money, first and last on an apartment in town. Car that isn't this. A fresh start. He smiled. I know it feels like giving up the last piece of him, but he's not up here, Wren. He's in your memories. A pile of rotten logs isn't your grandfather. I did not answer. He waited. Wren? I did not answer. Sweetheart, say something. Who's the contact? What? The man buying hunting leases. What's his name? A flicker. Does it matter? It's just that 30,000 is a lot of cash. For 40 acres with no road and no well. When 2 weeks ago you told a lawyer this place was a tax liability. And I'd be doing myself a favor letting the county take it. I kept my voice level, quiet certainty, the one Grandpa had taught me at the bench. So either you were lying then, or you're lying now. And I'd like to know which, because you're my brother, and I keep wanting to give you the benefit of the doubt. The warmth left the room faster than the cold came in. He sat back. He looked at me, the way you look at a tool that has turned in your hand and cut you. You don't know what you're talking about. You've been up here 2 weeks playing pioneer. You have no idea what's happening in the real world. I am trying to help you. I said, you're trying to help yourself. The development is dead. The bank is calling the loan. And you need this land. It hit him like a slap. He shot a look at Delphine. Pure venom. You told her. Delphine did not step back. I saw it happen. She did not step back. I told her you were coming. I didn't have to tell her the rest. She figured out the rest. She's smarter than both of us, Torsten. She always was. You just never stuck around long enough to notice. He stood up. The chair scraped. Don't you dare lecture me. You spineless. He caught himself. But he was already halfway there. You took the money. Same as me. You cashed the check. Both of you act like I'm. Cooper stood up. The old dog moved. Without hurry. Without noise. Between the shouting man and the girl at the bench. He put his gray head low. He watched Torsten. With the patience of an old animal. Who had already decided he would not move. Torsten looked down at the dog. And something in him went out. He dragged a hand down his face. And when he spoke again, the salesman was gone. What was left underneath was just tired and scared. I'm going to lose everything. He said it, almost to himself. Do you understand that? The house, the cars, all of it. Marisol is going to take the kids to her mother's. I have 11 days before the bank starts. 11 days. He looked toward the 40 acres. He could not see. In the dark. And the one thing standing between me and the bottom is a shack the old man left. To the kid who used to sweep his floor. That's the joke. That's the whole joke of my life. The cabin was quiet. Except for the storm. I said. He didn't leave it to me to spite you. He left everything to you, Wren. He always did. The bitterness came up out of him. From somewhere very deep. From a 17-year-old on a bus. That had never gotten off. He shipped me and Delphine off the second we were old enough. You know that. Couldn't wait. But you, the daughter's little girl, he kept. He taught you the chairs. He never once tried to teach me anything. Except how to stay out of his way. His voice cracked. He hated that it cracked. I could see him hate it. I spent my whole life trying to build something big enough. That he'd finally look at me. The way he looked at you. And he never did. And now he's dead. And he gave you the last thing. Just to make sure I'd know. There it was. The wound under the greed. The thing that had been driving my brother. Since before I was born. I felt the proof of his crime. Sitting in my pocket. Over my heart. I felt how easy it would be. To take it out. And end him. Quietly. With paper. The same as he had tried to end me. I thought about my grandfather's note. Don't let it make you hard. I looked at Torsten. And I did not see the man who had cleared out the accounts. I saw a boy on a porch. 17 years old. Nobody looking at him. Wondering why he was not the one being kept. Sit down, Torsten, I said, quietly. I have to show you something. And then I have to tell you something. And you are not going to like either one. He sat, slowly, like a man who had run out of moves. I went into the little back room. I came back out, with a ledger, and a single wrapped chair. I set the chair down in the lamplight, and I pulled the blanket off it. The honey-colored settee, with the arms that looked poured, and I turned it over so the underside faced up, and I pointed to the small burned bird. He made these, up here, for 45 years, not screen doors. These. He sold them all over the country, to museums, for thousands of dollars apiece, and nobody ever knew his name, because he signed them with a little bird he carved, when I was a baby. My voice did not shake. The mark is a Wren, Torsten. It's me. Every chair he made his whole life. He signed with my name. And he never told me he was doing it. He never told you. He never told anybody. The mark was never about who he loved more. Torsten stared at the bird burned, into the wood. His mouth opened, and closed. He wasn't poor, I said. He had real money the whole time, and you know what he did with it. I opened the ledger to the second column. I turned it so both my brother and sister could see. He gave it away. To people in this valley who were going under. the fire truck, Ottilie's husband's hospital bills, tuition for a kid he barely knew.
Mredzi.
Every penny, for 45 years. Because he decided money had cost him enough already. And he was done letting it make him into, I let the silence finish the sentence, into what you are right now. Delphine had come closer. She was looking at the ledger, her hand over her mouth. Torsten had gone gray. The money you split, I said. The 121,000. The house. That was never the inheritance, Torsten. That was just the part you could see. This is what he actually left. And he left it to me on purpose. Because I was the only one who could keep it going. And because he knew that the day after he died, you would come and take everything with a price tag and walk right past the only thing worth anything. I reached into my breast pocket and I took out the folded papers and I set them on the workbench between us. I kept my hand flat on top. This is the loan guarantee you forged. With his name. Torsten did not move. He did not breathe. He found it in the mail before he died. He kept a copy. He kept proof, Torsten, with a note in his own hand, saying he never signed it. The guarantee is fake, which means the bank can't touch this land. It never could. But it also means, the day a copy of this reaches the right desk, you go to prison. For fraud. The only sound in the cabin was Torsten's breathing. Very quiet, very fast. He looked at me. His eyes wet. You could put me away. He said it. A whisper. Right now. With that. Could. I looked at my brother. This stranger with our mother's eyes. And I felt the whole weight of the choice settle on me. Exactly as the old man had known it would. You took everything that had a price. He left me the rest. And the rest is the only reason. I'm not going to do it. I slid the papers off the bench. I held them in my hand. And I did not give them to him. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, when the road clears, you are going to drive down. And you are going to call that bank. And you are going to tell them the guarantee is forged. You are going to take my grandfather's land off the table. Because it was never yours to put there. And then you are going to deal with what you actually owe. Like a man. Without his name to hide behind. The development is gone. Let it go. My voice gentled. I'll help where I can. Not how you wanted. I'm not selling him to save you. But I've got chairs in that room worth more than you think. And a family doesn't go on the street. While I have them. Not even yours. Marisol keeps the kids. The kids keep their dad. That's the help. Take it. Or don't. Why? Torsten managed. After everything Because he asked me not to let this make me hard. I said. And because you're my brother. Both of those things are true at the same time. He spent 45 years proving they could be. Then I did the thing I did not know I was going to do. I picked up the folded loan document. And the note in my grandfather's hand. And I turned to the wood stove. I opened the door. The fire jumped. I looked at Torsten. He left me this. To choose. I choose. And I dropped the papers into the fire. They caught. Curled. Went orange. Turned to ash. The proof. The only proof. Gone. Torsten made a sound. I don't know what kind of sound. Delphine put her hand over her mouth. I closed the stove door. I turned back to my brother. Now I don't have anything to hold over you. Now you just have you. Do it right, Torsten. Not because I made you. Because it's the last thing you can do for him. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. There was nothing graceful about it. He was a grown man falling apart in a cold cabin. A man who had built a whole hard life. On the belief that he had been thrown away, learning all at once, that the truth was both worse and kinder than that. I did not go to him right away. I let him have it, as Grandpa would have, without crowding the moment. Then I crossed the room, and I crouched in front of the chair, and I put my hand on my brother's knee. He was scared for you, I said quietly. That's what the note is really about, if you ever read it. Not scared of you, for you. Because he looked at you, and he saw himself, at 30, chasing a number, getting harder every year. And he couldn't stand to watch it happen to somebody else he loved. I swallowed. He did love you, Torsten. He just loved you in the one language he trusted, which was building something that would still be standing after he was gone. He built it for all of us. He only left the key with me. Torsten lowered his hands. His face was wet and ruined, and for the first time since he had stepped out of that expensive truck 2 weeks ago, it was the face of someone I recognized, the brother who, when I was 4 years old, and afraid of the dark, had let me sleep on the floor by his bed, before he left us all. For the city. I don't know how to be anything but what I am, he said. Nobody did at first, I said. He taught me one cut at a time, slow. I almost smiled. Turns out he was teaching all of us. We just had to come up the mountain to find the lesson. Outside, very gradually, the wind began to fall. The storm had closed the road for the night, and there was no question of anyone driving down. So the three of us stayed. The first night we had spent under one roof, since Torsten was a boy. Delphine fed the stove. I warmed the last of Ottilie's soup on the camp ring. We ate it off mismatched plates, with Cooper working the floor for scraps. Nobody said much. Once, Torsten asked how long it took to make a chair. I told him a month. If you did it right. And Torsten looked at the rows of finished work, through the strong room door, and did the math on a whole life, spent a month at a time, and said nothing else. The silence was not comfortable yet, but it was honest, which was further than the Callahans had gotten in 20 years. Late, when both of them had finally slept. Torsten on the floor by the stove, Delphine sitting up in Grandpa's chair. I went quietly to the bench, and I pulled the lamp close, and I picked up the chair I had finished, the one with the bare spot underneath, where the mark would go. I ran my thumb over the smooth empty wood. I was not ready to burn the bird into it yet, but I was closer now than I had been a week ago, and for the first time, I understood the difference between earning a name and being handed one. By the time the snow let go of the mountain, the cabin had a chimney that smoked every morning, and a road you could drive without losing a muffler. Delphine had graded the old quarry road herself. 10 days on a rented machine, swearing and learning as she went, and now the truck could make the climb in any weather. She had taken the small room off the back of the workshop, the one that had been full of lumber, and she spent her mornings at the bench beside me, with a chisel she did not yet know how to sharpen, learning the first thing our grandfather had ever taught me, which was patience, and learning it slow, because slow was the only thing that worked. She was not good yet. Her joints didn't close. Her spindles came out crooked. She burned through a board of good cherry making a single leg, that she finally threw in the stove. But she came back to the bench every morning, and she stopped reaching for her phone, and the gray that had been under her eyes since the funeral started to fade. One afternoon I caught her running her thumb along the grain of a board, reading it, telling me where it wanted to break, before she cut, and I did not say anything, because our grandfather never made a fuss over a thing done right. He just let you feel it. The porch was solid now. We had jacked the sagging corner and set a new post. Cooper slept on the warm boards, in the patches of afternoon sun, slower than ever, his muzzle nearly white, content in a way an old dog only gets, when the person he chose is finally still. The first chair I sold was the one I had finished that first week, the one with the bare spot underneath. I had carried it around the workshop for a month, unable to burn the mark into it, until one evening in April, I set it under the lamp, and looked at it for a long time, and understood that it was good, not as good as his, but good enough to stand on its own legs. and hold a person up for 50 years, which was all he had ever asked, of a chair, or a person. I heated the iron in the stove until the bird glowed orange at the tip, and I turned the chair over, and I pressed my grandfather's mark, which was my own name, into what I had shaped with my own hands. It did not feel like taking, felt like answering for it. I wrote to Elias Thorne. 3 lines. The workshop was making chairs again. There was one ready. The mark was the same. The reply came in 9 days. He wrote that the old client, the one who had waited 19 years for a writing armchair, was still alive, just barely, that he would pay $8,000, and consider himself lucky. He asked only one thing, the same thing they had always asked, discretion. They would never use my name. They never had. I almost laughed when I read that. Alone in the workshop, with the dog. They thought they were protecting a secret. They had no idea. The name they were protecting was sitting right there, reading their letter. A girl in a flannel shirt, with sawdust in her hair. I built a crate for the chair myself, lined it with blankets, drove it 2 hours to the freight office. 3 weeks later, card came to the box in town.
No signature.
Just a few lines, in an old man's shaky hand. It said the chair had arrived. It said he had been waiting 19 years, and had nearly not lived to sit in it. And whoever was making them now, had the same hands as before. He wrote, because he could feel it. The moment he sat down, I read the card standing in the cold post office, and I put it in the bundle with all the others, and I understood that I had not inherited a workshop. I had inherited a conversation, going on for 45 years, that it was now my turn to keep. The check came. It was more money than I had ever held. I sat at the bench with it in my hand, and I thought about the second column in the ledger, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with most of it, because my grandfather had not only left me a craft, he had left me a habit, and I had decided to keep it. Torsten did what I told him to do. He called the bank the morning the road cleared, and he told them the guarantee was forged. It was an ugly few months after that. Lawyers, and statements, and a long, slow unwinding of the life he had built on borrowed nerve. The development was gone. The house went. Marisol did not, in the end, take the children to her mother's, because Torsten finally told her the whole truth. All of it. And a marriage can sometimes survive the truth better than it survives the lie. He took a job managing a building supply yard 2 towns over. A smaller version of the work he had once done, for a fraction of the money. And he was, by every account, surprisingly good at it. Once there was nothing left to prove. He came up the mountain for the first time in June. With his 2 kids and a cooler, and an apology he could not get all the way out of his mouth. The kids took to Cooper immediately, and to the workshop even faster. Torsten stood in the doorway watching his son pick up a curl of shaving, and smell it, the same as a boy had done in that doorway 30 years before, and a knot in his face came loose. That had been clenched his whole life. He really made all this, Torsten said. It was not quite a question. He really did, and he never said a word. 45 years. Torsten shook his head slowly. I spent all that time thinking he had nothing, thinking I had to go become something, because where I came from was nothing. He looked at me. It was the richest place in the whole valley, and I couldn't see it, because I was looking for the wrong kind of rich. You're seeing it now, I said. That's not nothing. He helped me steam bend a chair back that afternoon, his big hands careful on the form. And he was not good at it either, and he laughed at himself, and it was the first time I had heard my oldest brother laugh. Without an angle under it. Since I was a child. The diner almost closed in May. Ottilie had hung on as long as she could, but the roof finally went, and the quote to fix it was more than a year of what the place cleared. And one gray morning I came down for coffee, and found a paper sign taped inside the steamed glass. Closing. Thank you for 38 years. 3 weeks later, a roofer's truck pulled up outside the diner. and a crew went to work, and a letter arrived for Ottilie, from a lawyer in town, saying that an anonymous friend of the diner had taken care of the roof, and the back taxes, both, and that the friend asked only that the corner booth stay where it was, because a town needs one place to sit down across from another person. Ottilie stood in the middle of her saved diner, with the letter shaking in her hand, and she looked for a long time out the window toward the mountain, and she did the same thing she had done 11 years before, when the hospital bills disappeared. She suspected. She could not prove it. And the one person she would have asked just poured her another coffee and changed the subject. But I saw her look at the mountain, and I understood that the keeping of a secret is its own kind of inheritance, passed down now to the girl who used to get the extra strip of bacon. The apprentice came in the fall. Her name was Sable Kirchner. She was 15, and she had aged out of a foster placement 2 towns over, with a garbage bag of clothes, and a chip on her shoulder the size of a cord of wood. The lawyer in town, who by now understood exactly the sort of thing the Callahan girl liked to be told about, mentioned that there was a kid sleeping in her car behind the laundromat, who had nowhere to land. I drove down and I found her, and I did not offer her pity, because pity was an insult, and I knew it from the inside. I offered her a job, sweeping at first, then sharpening, then, when the girl's hands proved they could be still, a chisel. Why me? Sable asked me, suspicious, on the first cold morning. The same question I had once nearly asked a lawyer across a desk. Because somebody did it for me, I said, and because you're never poor, as long as you've still got something to give away. Somebody told me that once. Took me a while to understand it. I handed her a broom. Start here. Same as I did. Sable did not believe in it at first. She swept like she was being punished, slammed the truck door too hard, and waited for the catch she was sure was coming. Because in her life, there had always been a catch. One morning, in her second week, she put a gouge clean through a seat blank I had spent 2 days hollowing, and she stood there white-faced, already halfway to the door, already pulling the old hard look back over her face. The one that said she would leave, before she could be thrown out. I picked up the ruined blank, turned it over in my hands, set it on the stove pile. Wood's cheap, I said. Sit down. I'll show you how to hold the gouge, so it doesn't run on you. Sable stared at me. That's it. You're not going to. Slow down, I said. And my grandfather was in my mouth when I said it. It doesn't care how fast you are. It only cares if you paid attention. Sit. And the girl sat. So there were 4 of us at the bench some mornings now, when Delphine came up, and Torsten's kids were out of school, a stray of a girl learning to read the grain, and an old shepherd watching from his patch of sun. On Sundays, Ottilie drove up with a pie, and did the diner's books in the corner, while the others worked, and the sound of the place was chisels, and the stove, and somebody laughing, and Cooper moving foot to foot underneath, collecting the warmth of everyone at once. It was not a big life. It was a full one, which I was learning were not the same thing, and that the full one was the only kind worth having. The cabin that nobody had wanted, the shack, the tax liability, the worthless 40 acres at the end of a road no one plowed, had become the most alive place on the mountain. People in the valley were starting to notice that the chairs were being made again, though nobody knew quite by whom, and that now and then, when a family was going under, the bills quietly stopped coming. Pumper truck got a new motor. A kid got a semester. They never found out who it was. Everyone agreed. Just one of those things about the valley. A luck the place had always had. And I let them believe it, because the believing was half the gift. Late in the year, on the first night cold enough for a real fire, I sat alone in the workshop after the others had gone down the mountain, and I finished the second chair I had ever made, entirely on my own, without looking at his notebooks, without asking anyone, just me. and the wood, and what he had taught me. I carried my grandfather's old chair over from beside the stove, and I set the new one next to it, the two of them side by side in the lamplight, the old maker in the new. I turned the new chair over, and I heated the iron in the stove until the bird glowed orange at the tip, and I pressed it home, and the little bird burned dark into the wood, my name in his, at the same time, the same as it had always been. Then I set it upright, and I sat down in it, just to feel it hold me, and it did, sure and level. The first chair in my whole life I had built to catch myself. On the windowsill above the bench sat the small carved wren, the one that had ridden in my coat pocket through every cold of that first terrible winter, the paint worn off, the wood gone smooth and dark, where my thumb had rubbed it. My whole life I had stopped carrying it. It lived here now, where it belonged, watching over the room it had quietly signed. For 45 years, I thought about the morning my brother and sister had laughed and handed me a key, certain they had given me the one thing in the estate worth nothing. They had taken the house, and the money, and the tools, every item with a price on it, and they had walked right past. The only thing that could not be carried off, because it was never an object at all. It was a craft, and a name, and a habit of kindness, and the slow proof that a thing you make by hand outlives the hands. That was the only kind of rich he had ever wanted to be. I banked the stove, and I called the old dog. Cooper got up, slow, stiff, but he got up, and the two of us stood a moment in the doorway, looking back at the warm room, the tools in their rows, the two chairs waiting by the fire, for whoever needed holding up. Then I shut the door. My grandfather had kept locked, my whole life, the door that had given me everything, and I walked down the porch he had built, and I did not look back, because there was no need. Behind me, in the dark woods, at the end of the road no one plowed. The one lamp I had left burning glowed gold in the window, the warmest thing on the whole cold mountain. A chair holds you up, whether you notice it or not. He had spent his whole life proving a person could do the same, and now, so would I.